Hey crafty friends, it's Sandy here for Pajama Crafter Stamps, and today we are diving headfirst into Shark Week fun. There's a whole lot of sharky goodness happening in the shop, on the blog, and across social media. And I'm swimming in with a bright, colorful card featuring the brand new Sharkcuterie Board Stamp Set. So grab your favorite crafty snacks, settle in, and let's get started. And if you love creative card making ideas, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. For the background on this card, I'm going to be doing a little bit of ink blending. So I have a piece of cardstock here cut at 5.5 by 4.25, and I'm just going to start with a little bit of Distress Oxide ink in Salvage Patina. I'm going to start at the top of my cardstock and just work down, just about a third of the way. The next color that I'm going to be using is Peacock Feathers, and I'm just going to start by blending that in towards the center of that cardstock. And then I'm also going to go back into my Salvage Patina to kind of blend where those two colors are coming together. I want to make sure I don't have a harsh line. My third color is going to be Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm just going to be blending that off to the side and then bringing it onto my cardstock pretty much at the bottom, kind of going up into that Peacock Feathers color. I will go back and forth between those two colors again to make sure that I don't have any harsh lines. And to finish up, I'm going to use one of my smaller blending brushes, and I'm going to just blend in a little bit of Blueprint Sketch at the very bottom. And that just gives me one more layer of depth to my ink blending. Rather than squirt water directly on my cardstock, I'm actually going to squirt it in the palm of my hands, kind of get it spread around, and then just clap my hands over that cardstock, and that gives me a nice fine mist with no big splotches. To add one more layer of dimension to this background, I'm going to take a little bit of white acrylic paint, put it on one of my stamping blocks. I will water that down a little bit, and then I am just going to use my paintbrush, not only to mix it up, but just to spatter that cardstock. While my background is drying, I want to do a little bit of work on my sentiment. So I've got it stamped out on a piece of white cardstock. And luckily, this time I do have a die that will fit, or the sentiment will actually fit inside my die. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. I love when that happens because then I can kind of get a little bit of a decorative border around my sentiments. With my sentiment cut out, I am using a small blending brush to actually add a little bit of color to those edges on that white cardstock just to tone that down a bit. And then I'm just going to hit all of those little edges on the wood grain cardstock just to raise that embossing up a little bit and give it more of a wood feel. With both of those pieces completed, I can go ahead and glue my sentiment on top of that, and I have just created a fun little, kind of looks like a little menu board, is what I'm going to call it anyway. I'm going to use a die from my stash to cut out this background. I like this little wavy edge, and I'm going to just center that die so that the bulk of my color, the darker colors, is down at the bottom. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Here I'm just making sure that I have enough elements stamped out and cut out to decorate this card. The stamp sets that I'm using are, of course, Sharkcuterie Board, and What the Krill Stamp Set. My ink blended background is not quite an A2 size, so I'm going to go ahead and make a background here. So I've got a piece of turquoise cardstock cut to 5.5 by 4.25, which is the A2 size. And then I'm going to put another piece of cardstock on top of that, and that is oh, just a smidge smaller than 5 1/4 or 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. I think I went down just about 1/8 of an inch. I like the yellow along with the turquoise. It kind of makes that background piece that we inked really pop. Now the relaxing part of card making. At least it is for me. I love to color. I'm using Copic markers, and the colors that I am going to be using on the Shark board are E13. That's going to be my lightest color. My mid-tone is going to be E25, and then my darkest tone is going to be E27. Now when I do Copic coloring, I like to color in the whole area that's going to have that blend with my lightest color first. That just helps me wet the paper, and it helps me with my blending of the other two colors. Plus, on something like this, it also helps me get kind of a lay of the land because there's little pieces of board that's showing in between the little stacks of food in there, and that just kind of helps me get familiar with the image. Now I am using a paper from Pajama Crafters called Marshmallow Coloring Paper, and I have been recently introduced to this paper and I absolutely love it. And I am super picky about the paper I use when I'm coloring. I just have no tolerance for any type of ink bleeding. It just makes the whole process so frustrating. So my recommendation is to get some of that paper. She's got it in 8.5 by 11 sheets or A2 size panels, and give it a try. I don't think you'd be disappointed. All right, back to the coloring. We're going to go with the lightest color of E13. My mid color again is E25, and then we will just touch up those shadow areas with a little bit of E27. Next, we're going to do a little bit of red, and I am using R14 as my lightest color, R17, and R29 is my darkest color. And I'm just doing a couple of the little containers on the charcuterie board. For the little basket, I'm going to be using E42, my lightest color, E43, mid color, E44, and I really like this color combination, and I kind of wish I had used it on other spots of this coloring. I like that color. I knew I was going to be using some real earthy tones to color in all the little shells and everything on the charcuterie board, so I wanted to make sure I got some brighter colors in there. So for the chip bowl, and then the little, I think they're pineapples, that's what I'm calling them anyway, pineapples on that right side of the board, and then the little fish at the very front of the board, I'm going to color those yellow. And the color combination that I'm going to be using is Y00, my lightest color. My mid color will be Y08, and then my darkest color is Y19. And I think that really just kind of balances out all the yellows, at least on that charcuterie board. To add a little bit more brightness to this board, I'm going to add in a little bit of orange. So I am going to be using YR12, YR15, and YR18, and I'm just going to do those little fish that are kind of mid-board, and then whatever those are up in the top that I colored that bowl red. I'm not sure what they are. I'm not a big seafood eater, but this one really just baffled me. Next, I'm going to color in the little pail that's actually got that shark with his mouth open. And the colors I'm using for that are going to be W1 is my lightest color, W3 will be my mid-tone, and W5 will be my darkest color. And that one, I was real sure that that was a little bucket. Sticking with the warm grays, I wanted to do the little clamshells over there towards the left, and I'm going to be using W000, so yeah, and then W00, and W1 is my darkest color. And I know there's a correct way of saying that, but W triple sounds weird, and W double sounds weird too, so you're just getting it very literal from me today. Another color combination I'm using on those little food bites is YG91 and YG93, and that's just kind of a olive mossy color, and I like that color combination also. I'm sure I'll be using that in the future. Now, for what I'm calling little crackers, I am going to be using, let me look at my notes here, sorry. E50 is going to be my lightest color, and then E31. And I'm just going to use that E31 just to touch up those edges and give them a little bit of dimension. And then let's just finish up this charcuterie board by coloring in that little fin that's sticking out of the dip, and then the little shark that's over to the side that's got his mouth open. This time I'm going to be using some of my cool grays. I am going to be using C1, C3, and then C5 for the dark shading on the fin and the shark. And then I'm also going to use a little bit of C7 to darken up the inside of that mouth. When I laid my shark on my background, I didn't like the way that the white around the shark was showing, and this is just a really picky little thing. So I decided to go back in with my real fine tipped scissors and trim off all of that white border around him and just clean it up. Now, if this had been a more complicated image, I wouldn't have bothered doing that, just because that's really tedious, and sometimes you can trim too much and kind of make those edges look rough. But these were nice long edges and fairly large curves, so I felt like I could do that and just clean that up a little bit, and I'll get rid of that white border. And then to be even more obsessive about that edge, I'm going to take a marker and just run around that outside edge and color in that white. I suggest if you're going to do this, be very, very careful, because it's super easy to touch the tip of that marker to all that area you've colored, and that sure would be a shame. But I like the way this looks. Alright, off camera I have colored the little images that I've got down on the bottom corners of this card. And as far as coloring goes, I just wanted to make sure I was using some bright colors just to kind of offset all those neutral or, woodsy colors in the board. So I just wanted to keep that just a little bit brighter. And I'm just going to glue those at the bottom corner, filling in where necessary with shells, just to give it a nice flow at the bottom. I do like to have a little bit of dimension on my cards, so I'm going to pop up the sign, the shark, and then the little jellyfish or octopus, I'm not sure, and the little fish that's on the right hand side with some foam dots. I also add a little bit of glue to that, and that's not so much to make sure that they're going to adhere to the card, but it gives me a barrier and a little bit of wiggle room, so I can just get that glue on there and just kind of wiggle that piece around and move it until I get it exactly where I want it, and then I just leave it in place. Not only do I like a little bit of dimension on my card, but I also like a little bit of bling too. So I'm going to just take some of the fairy dust rhinestones and just place them around that charcuterie board just to give that card a nice little sparkle. To finish up this card, I'm going to put it on a card base. I have a piece of cardstock that is cut to 5.5 by 8.5. and I'm going to score it at 4 1/4. I'll go ahead and get that folded in half and give it a good press with my bone folder. Now, I like to add just a little bit to the inside of my cards. I feel like there's so much paper on the front of the card that when you open it and you just have that single layer, it feels kind of, I don't know, flimsy. So I take another piece of cardstock that's cut to 5 1/4 by 4 inches, and I glue that on the inside, and that seems to just kind of plus it up a little bit, give it a little bit more body. Now, if I were going to put a sentiment on the inside of this card, I would also stamp that on that little piece that I'm going to add. But since this is just going to be a little note card and I'm leaving it blank, that's what I'm going to do. So once I have the front of my card adhered to the card base, I'll go ahead, add in that extra little piece on the inside, and our card is complete. All right, and that pretty much wraps up this fantastic card. Thank you so much for swimming along with me today. If you enjoyed this sharky little project, please chum the waters with a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more crafty fun. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.